Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Jess and today I'm going to be sharing with you the books that I read during the month of May, and I have no idea what happened during the month of May, but somehow I managed to read 8 books and I read some really good books as well this month, which I am excited to share with you all. But before I do that, I just wanted to talk about the current situation that is happening in America and subsequently worldwide following the horrific murder of George Floyd. My thoughts and prayers are with the black community. I cannot even put into words or begin to imagine what it must be like, but I didn't want to just sit here, not to make this about me, but I didn't want to just sit here and film this video and not use this platform to do something productive. So what I have done and what I will do is link to some resources and some articles which I have found to be useful and informative in the description bar down below, as well as things that you can proactively do, such as petitions that you can sign and that kind of thing. I know for myself and for us as a family, we have spent this week listening and learning and trying to educate ourselves on how to be better allies and how to be actively anti-racist, and we will continue to do that. I'm not just going to sit here and think, well, I've said all that now, so job done. You know, I'm very much aware that this is an ongoing battle, an ongoing conversation, and it's not just going to be done and dusted with the posting of a few social media posts and some videos. So please do go and look at those links, educate yourself, take the time out to read and research, and yeah. Now I'm going to start talking about the books that I read in May. So as always, I'm going to go through these in the order that I read them, so yeah, let's get started. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. This is the sequel to Strange the Dreamer. These are YA fantasy books, and I did actually pick up Strange the Dreamer and read it in April in anticipation of picking this one up, but I will say that Laini Taylor does a great job of recapping what happens in the first book without coming across as too heavy-handed if you didn't want to do that. So obviously I can't talk too much about what this particular book is about without spoiling it for anyone who hasn't read the first one, but I will say that this did conclude the duology in a very satisfactory way, and I didn't see the way that the story was going to play out happening at all, and I do like the way that she has kind of left it open-ended for spin-off series perhaps to take place. This book wasn't perfect. I think that Laini Taylor did on occasion take the long-winded, windy route to get to the finale, but overall, I mean, the two books together are just gorgeous, fantastical storytelling in a rich and unique world with some really interesting characters, and I have just thoroughly enjoyed them both. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I'll just quickly explain what the first book is about in case you are interested. So the basic premise of the first book is that we have a young orphan librarian called Laszlo Strange, and Laszlo is obsessed with the lost mystical city of Weep. Weep was a city which no visitors were allowed to go to, but they brought all kinds of fascinating and exotic items into the rest of the world to trade, and then one day something happens and it's as though Weep has just ceased to exist. Weep isn't even the city's real name. The real name has been wiped from everyone's memory, and it sort of fades out of existence for most people, except Laszlo has made it his lifelong mission to research and discover absolutely everything he can about the city of Weep. And then one day a delegation of people come to the city where Laszlo is, and they are from Weep, and they are looking to gather together a cohort of people with all kinds of different skills to take back to the city of Weep in order to help them. And that's all I'm going to say. But I thoroughly enjoyed both books and I would highly recommend them. Then I picked up A Wall of Silence by Tracy Buchanan. This is a fast-paced mystery thriller about a woman called Melissa who returns home from work one day to find her 3 children gathered around the body of their father. He has been stabbed and he is lying injured on the kitchen floor, and it becomes quickly apparent to Melissa that somehow one of her children or all of her children are involved in what has happened. And so we're kind of going with Melissa on this journey as she tries to find out before the police do what exactly has happened. This was a real page turner, and there were a number of twists which I just didn't see coming at all. It only took me a couple of days to read. In particular, I really appreciated the dilemma that Melissa found herself in. You know, on the one hand, as a mother, she wants to believe the best of her children and she wants to protect her children. On the other hand, she loves and trusts her husband, and she can't see how it could have come to a situation where one of the children would want to hurt their father and her husband. And there's also this interesting backdrop where they live in, it's almost like a gated community, and there's a little bit of exclusivity about the people who live there. They're a bit snobbish, and Melissa doesn't quite fit, and that plays quite a large part in the story as well. I wasn't so keen on the repetitive nature of the writing, particularly when it comes to Melissa's internal musings about what's happened. So every time she is thinking through what could have gone on, she always added a line on the end, like and one of my children is responsible for this, and I can't believe one of my children would be capable of stabbing their father. And it was literally every single time, and it was just a little bit irritating by the end, because, you know, as a reader, you understand right from the beginning what is at stake, and you just don't need to be reminded and reminded and reminded. It did definitely get a little bit irritating, and actually when you delve down into the plot, not that much actually happens, but as I said, it only took me a couple of days. There were a number of good twists, and I think if this is the type of genre that you enjoy reading, then you would probably like it a lot. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was okay, wasn't anything mind-blowing, but a good read nonetheless. The next book I read was probably my favourite book of the month, and that was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This is a science fiction book which has been on and off my TBRs for the longest time, but I absolutely loved it, and I am so glad that I decided to finally pick it up. So as I said, this is science fiction. It is set in 2044, and basically the world is a hot mess, and so people prefer to spend their time in this immersive utopia known as the Oasis, and you access the Oasis through the use of a VR headset and gloves and bodysuits and that kind of thing. In layman's terms, it's kind of like The Sims, but you get to actually be the sim and have the sensation that the sim is experiencing. That's how my non-science fiction mind kind of worked that out. So we're following our protagonist Wade Watts, who, like everybody else, prefers to spend his days in the Oasis. He has no money, he lives in something called the Stacks, and he's just on kind of the edges of society. And the creator of the Oasis was a man called James Halliday, and when James Halliday dies, he releases a statement which basically says that he has hidden within the Oasis 3 keys and a number of clues and puzzles to solve, and whoever gets the 3 keys and solves the puzzle will basically become his heir. They will inherit his giant fortune as well as full control of the Oasis. And Wade, like many other people, goes into the Oasis and tries to find the keys, and one day Wade accidentally comes across the first key, and we pretty much follow a mad race to the finish line, and it is fast-paced and it is enjoyable. What is interesting about this book is that the creator of the Oasis, James Halliday, was obsessed with 80s pop culture, and that is scattered throughout the book. It features hugely, but it's done in a non-heavy-handed way that's actually really enjoyable. I think that was what put me off reading, because as a person who was born in the late 80s, I kind of felt like the references would go over my head, but they don't. It's just a really fun, fast-paced, enjoyable book. Wade is a really likeable main character. You root for him all the way through. There are a number of other interesting side characters. Yeah, I would just highly recommend it. If you've ever thought about reading it and then thought, well, I don't really read science fiction, or I'm not really sure it'll be for me, then I would highly recommend just giving it a go, because I thought that it was fantastic. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Then I picked up 2 Dark Reigns, and immediately after that 5 Dark Fates, which are books 3 and 4 and the final 2 books in the 3 Dark Crowns series by Kenda Blake. These are dark YA fantasy, and I loved them so much. Obviously, as with Muse of Nightmares, I can't talk too much about what these books are about without spoiling them, but again, as with Muse of Nightmares, they just ended in such a satisfactory way. Kendare Blake kept the tension right the way through to the end. I had no idea how everything was going to play out or how it was going to finish. I just thought it was done so fantastically. When I read these two books, it was just the ideal time. They were exactly what I needed to read at the time, and I flew through them and I loved them. So the basic premise of these books is that we are on a magical island called Fenburn, and every generation the reigning queen gives birth to triplets, always girls, and all gifted in a different magical ability. So in this particular generation we have a poisoner, a naturalist, and an elemental, and the girls are raised together for a little while and then they are separated and raised in the relevant house for their magical ability, and on their 16th birthday they are literally unleashed on one another, and it becomes a fight to the death, and the surviving triplet becomes the reigning queen and the cycle begins again. And that's kind of where the story begins, but just so much else happens. There are so many characters to like and love. It's just fantastic. I cannot recommend the series enough. Even if you're not a big fantasy reader, there's not a whole heap of world building that you've got to get on board with. It just is fast-paced, dark, gritty fantasy, and I loved it. I think one of the best things about it is that because there are so many different strong characters, particularly strong female characters who all have their own individual voice, you do develop your favourite, but Kendare Blake just keeps you guessing on how everything is going to play out right up until the very last moment, and I just thought it was so well done. If you can't tell, I thought it was great. I loved it. I would definitely recommend it. Just really, really good books, and yeah, ones that I will continue, I think, to talk about and recommend. They are dark. Obviously the whole setup, you're talking about these three girls trying to kill one another, so death is a huge element of the stories, but just really, really good. I really enjoyed them. And then the next book I'm going to talk about is probably my least favourite book of the month, and I think it's time for me to admit that this author's writing style is just not for me. So I picked up 84K by Claire North. So this is dystopian and it's set in the UK. Basically everything in the UK is owned by the company, so there are no state services anymore. We've got no NHS, no state schools, nothing like that. If you don't have insurance or if you don't have the money to pay the company, you can't access services, and you are basically on the outskirts of society. And one of the things which has been sold to the company is crime, or the criminal justice system. And so our protagonist Theo Miller works for something called the Criminal Audit Office, and his job is basically to assign a monetary value to every single crime that occurs. So let's say, for example, there was a murder. Theo has to work out how much monetary value is on the life of the person who was killed, and then there are all these additional things like, did the police have to go and investigate, were lawyers involved, and that all comes to a lump sum. Theo has, for the most part, kept his head down his whole life, and then his ex-lover is murdered, and that sets Theo off basically on a journey of total and utter destruction as he attempts to bring down the company. And on the surface, I really wanted to love this book, and the only reason that I didn't DNF it, apart from the fact that I have a chronic inability to DNF books, is because the premise just sounded so good, and I wanted to give the book every opportunity to kind of redeem itself. But I think that, as I said, Claire North's writing style for me, it just is distracting and comes across as quite chaotic, and I find myself so busy trying to interpret the way that she's writing that I feel removed from the story quite a lot of the time. So in this particular book, for example, because I have read another one by her which was pretty similar, she writes in broken sentences like that, particularly when we're getting internal thoughts from our characters, and it's just distracting, and I'm gonna say it feels lazy. It feels like it's this affectation where it's supposed to be artistic, but to me it just comes across as I couldn't be bothered to write what the character was actually thinking, and I don't think that that's what she meant, but that is how it comes across. And so I spent a lot of the book just trying to work out, trying to read between the lines basically, which just wasn't for me, and it meant that I didn't really connect with the characters, and character connection is a huge part of my reading experience and whether I enjoy a book or not. So it's not to say that Claire North is not a good author, it's not to say that this isn't a good book, it just didn't click with me at all, and I think maybe that is down to Claire North's writing style. So I actually gave this 2 out of 5 stars, but I mean the premise just sounds so good, and maybe if you like Claire North's writing then you would enjoy this and you should give it a go. I mean, I would never tell anyone not to give it a go, but yeah, unfortunately it just didn't click with me. And then the same thing kind of happened with the next book that I picked up, in that I thought that I would really enjoy it, but a lack of connection with the characters, and one small thing that happened right at the beginning which bugged me throughout the entire of the story just meant that I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. So I picked up This Terrible Beauty by Katrin Schumann. This is historical fiction set predominantly in post-World War II East Germany, and we are following our protagonist, a young girl called Bettina. At the beginning of the book, Bettina's father dies and she marries an older gentleman called Werner. Werner works in local government, and as the story progresses he kind of works his way up the ranks and eventually ends up with connections to the secret police, so he becomes quite a powerful person in their little town. Meanwhile, Bettina meets and falls in love with this idealistic young man. They start an affair, they get caught out, and the story sort of builds from there. And then we're also following a storyline 10 years later. We're following Bettina as she lives and works as a photographer in Chicago, and basically has to live with the decisions that she made or that she was forced to make. I haven't read many books set during post-World War II, and certainly not set in East Germany, and I thought that the way that the author captured that location and that time period was done really well. I enjoyed discovering that part of history, and I would like to read more books set during that time. What bugged me was that at the beginning of the book, Bettina is depicted as a little bit of a rebel. Her father says something to her about behaving and keeping her head down, and so you kind of get this image of her that she's going to be a little bit of a rule breaker, a little bit of a rebel, which obviously in a very controlled community is not going to be ideal. But then a few chapters in, she makes the decision to marry Werner, and you just get no explanation whatsoever about why she makes this decision, and it seems like a total U-turn on this independent individual that she's portrayed as, even down to, you know, just a line, you know, after my father's death I wanted to protect myself, you know, as a single woman I wanted to have some security, anything like that, but you just get zero explanation, and it wound me up so much that it just really affected my connection with Bettina as a character, and I found myself really unsympathetic to her. And also I wasn't massively keen on the affair storyline. You know, I understand that affairs happen, and I understand that in the time period that we're talking about, you know, societal influences and cultural influences and divorces and single women wouldn't have been a thing that really occurred, but the whole lying and deception and manipulation that Bettina does, it just didn't sit well with me, and again that affected my ability to be sympathetic to her as a character, and then to what happens later on in the book. So it was a real shame, because on the surface I thought I was going to really enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed the setting and the way that the author depicted the time period, as I said, but in terms of characters this book just fell a little bit flat for me, which was a shame. So yeah, overall another one that just fell a little bit flat for me. I think I gave this one 2.5 out of 5 stars. Not the perfect read. It was okay, but I just didn't click with it, unfortunately. But then to end this video on a slightly better note, the final book that I picked up in May was The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. This is the first book in a trilogy called The Remnant Chronicles. It is, surprise surprise, YA fantasy. I was on a little bit of a YA fantasy train in the month of May. This book wasn't perfect, but it was such a good opening book to a trilogy. I really enjoyed it. I absolutely flew through it. I'm so excited to pick up the next one when I get my reading mojo back. So the basic premise is that we're following a young girl called Leah, who is first daughter of the Kingdom of Morrigan, and right at the beginning of the book Leah flees on the day of her arranged marriage, and she is pursued by 2 individuals. So you read from 3 points of view. You read from the point of view of Leah, and you read from the point of view of the jilted wanted prince and also an assassin, both of whom are pursuing Leah. But the twist is that you don't know which point of view is the prince and which point of view is the assassin. And it did take me a little bit of time to get into that. I found it a little bit I found it took me out of the story a little bit to begin with, but that was mostly because I was busy trying to work out who could be who and look for hidden signs and hints. Once I just accepted the way that the story was written, yeah, I just found it so enjoyable. Leah is an incredibly likable protagonist. You just root for her and this new life that she's trying to make for herself the whole way through. You actually find yourself sympathetic and rooting, or certainly I did, for the prince and for the assassin as well. There were a few problematic issues. There is a small element of woman needing to be saved by a man, which I felt like detracted a little bit from Leah's personality, because she comes across as really strong and independent, and I didn't love the way that the book ended. I'm hoping that that's going to be remedied in the final 2 books. We'll see how that pans out. But yeah, so it wasn't free of problems, but just on the whole, thoroughly enjoyable. Really liked it. Can't wait to see how the story develops, and I would definitely recommend. There you go. They are the books that I read during the month of May. Let me know what your favourite read was during the month of May. I always love to know. As I mentioned at the beginning, please do go and check out the links that I have left down below in the description bar. If you enjoyed this video, please give me the thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. As always, thank you for watching. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you all soon.